Good evening. Welcome to a special program of the International Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee. As always, the International Grapevine always have special programs. We're going to be talking about divorce and mediation, the importance of divorce and the complications of divorce, and what better person to talk about divorce as our special guest. We're pleased tonight on the International Grapevine to have an attorney which specializes in marriage, divorce, and things like that. We're talking about our special guest, Sandra Munoz, who has been kind enough to be on our program. Welcome to our program tonight, Ms. Munoz.
Thank you for having me very much. Thank you. Well, studies have shown that 50% of marriages end up in divorce. And for whatever reason, many of those divorces end up in court. And you can have an uncontested divorce, which means that the parties agree to the divorce. The parties agree to dividing their assets evenly or whichever way. They agree to where the children are going to live. And or there are no assets and no children. And so you would have an uncontested divorce. But the contested divorces usually involve children, custody of the children, child support, property issues, marital property issues, how that's going to be divided, and also any other marital property like pensions. So and those are called contested divorces.
Well, clearly, I think the number that you mentioned, 50%, it tells us a lot about the amount of divorce that are taking place all, all over the world. A lot of complications. People hurry up sometime and jump and get married without sitting down and having a conversation where is it the right time to get married? Is it the right time to engage, to have family and stuff like that? And if you're not prepared, if you don't have that type of communication, it gets extremely complex and it leading to divorce. One of the questions that one of my audience wrote to me is why young people are jumping so fast in divorce therapy, whether it be sitting down and going over things to make sure that everything work out properly. Why youngsters are jumping so fast into divorce?
Why are they? So the question is, why are youngsters jumping quickly to divorce?
Yes.
Okay. So, in my experience, it has been that there are many different factors. One of them is that there is a lack of communication. Money is a very huge factor in divorce. If there's one of the parties in the marriage that feels that they're carrying the financial weight of the relationship, that can create a lot of stress in the marriage. Also, if infidelity, that's another reason why people get divorced. And there are different reasons. But to get divorced, you have to have a reason to get divorced. And the most common one now, it's almost like a no fault, is that the marriage has been irretrievably broken for the past 6 months.
How widespread is infidelity? And you look at TV, you look at these programs and stuff like that, and infidelity plays a big part. How widespread is that infidelity situation?
So I don't have the statistics, but I can certainly tell you that there's more than just one way of committing, uh, infidelity. For example, it doesn't just have to be with, someone going out of the marriage and dating somebody else or having an intimate relationship with someone else. It doesn't that's not the only way. Now we have social media. So people are on social media communicating with other individuals during their marriage, and I've had cases where people are getting divorced because their partner has been involved with in a relationship through social media. So that happens as well. But many people have many reasons why they get divorced, and ultimately, when they come to me, I, as of practice, do talk to people and say, "Are you sure you want to get divorced? Why do you want to get divorced?" I certainly don't want anyone to come to my office and file for divorce on an impulse. I want them to have thought about it. It is a serious uh, uh, choice and a decision. I've had cases. I just have one now where the parties agreed to work it out, and so we everybody signed a stipulation to discontinue the divorce. So that happens too. In the middle of the divorce, the parties decide to work it out, and that they really don't want to get divorced.
As we continue talking about divorces, the plus, the minuses, and the consequence of them, as Ms. Munoz have answered quite a few questions about them. And one of them I loved the most is when she talked about a couple who came to her at the beginning talking about a divorce, and they get back to her talking about getting back together, which I think is it's a beautiful thing if they can work it out. Because divorce, in some cases, kids suffer a lot. A lot of things happen in a divorce that put they expose the family, they expose the kids and stuff like that. So I like to hear sometime when people can sit back naturally, have a conversation, and says, you know what, let's look at one another. Let's see if we can work things out. That's a very big plus. One of the questions that I came up with that is very interesting, where does narcissist people ever initiate at their narcissistic?
So that's a psychological term, and I'm not um, I'm not professionally trained to be able to even like diagnose if someone is narcissistic or not. But I will tell you that when people have um, mental issues, which they look perfectly normal, but they have underlying conditions that, are not so obvious, it certainly does make the divorce even more complicated and more litigious. And so, because usually when two people are looking for the best interest of their family, which their children, in this case, they will try to resolve um, their case. And I have seen cases where if there's property, people decide to divide it evenly or equitably. Equitably doesn't always mean even, doesn't always mean 50-50, but fairly. And they share the children and they work that out and everybody is happy. I've seen that. But I've also had cases where people are fighting for, they're fighting, custody, or they're fighting parenting time. And sometimes they're asking for unreasonable things when they have a history of domestic violence, and they're asking for joint custody, which is a very difficult situation to have when you have clear domestic violence history, and you have someone who was the perpetrator, and you have someone else who was the victim. And so to put a victim and a perpetrator in a situation of joint custody where they have to discuss all the decisions, the major decisions regarding the children, like the school, what school they're going to go to, who are their doctors, what are the medical decisions, religion, decisions based on their religion. So that becomes problematic because you have the perpetrator who is the individual that has always had the power and control over the victim, and then you have the victim who will only feel re-victimized during that process of trying to arrive at a decision together, which it will be impossible because usually the perpetrator will want to get his or her way. So, I mean, those are situations where, I have had cases that have lasted for years because people are asking for unrealistic things. And if we go to trial, you don't go to trial right away. First, you try to work it out. You have court appearances, conferences. And so then if you eventually go to trial, then it could be a few years, that you're litigating a divorce.
No question about it. How important is an attorney in divorce matters? Because I guess if things are out of control, one party is definitely going to look for an attorney, and I would imagine that the other party also will be forced to find an attorney. How important, from a lever situation?
So it is extremely important. I have situations right now where I'm cleaning up the messes, if you know what I mean, where they already did the divorce. One party agreed to agreed to whatever they agreed to. And then at the end of the day, the other party will come to court and file a motion, a post judgment motion. That means a motion that's filed after the divorce judgment was issued, and they'll file this post judgment motion to enforce the judgment. And they'll come to me, the person who's now being brought to court because they're not complying with the judgment. And I'm reading the judgment, I'm reading the stipulation, and I cannot believe this person agreed to what they agreed to. I cannot believe and so I would say, don't sign an agreement without having a lawyer look at it and tell you what you are entitled to. And if you want to waive everything, you can waive everything. Or if you want to give everything away, you can give everything away. Or if you want to give child support more than what the statutory amount is, then fine. Do that, but make sure you have a lawyer who's going to explain to you this is the statutory amount. You don't have to give more than the statutory amount because things happen. And sometimes people, you mentioned narcissists. Sometimes, the narcissist will be like, yeah, I agree. Get this divorce done with. I don't care. I don't want it. And then at the end of the day, they're hit with, an order that they can't follow. And quite frankly, they cannot go back and change because even though they didn't have a lawyer, most probably a judge allocated them and asked them, do you know everything that was in this stipulation? Did you read it? Did you sign it? Are you under the influence of alcohol or drugs that impedes your ability to sign this stipulation? And they'll say no, 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 no. So how do you go back and say, oh, it was unfair? Because the only way you can go back and ask that a stipulation, or which is an agreement, be set aside, is if you show that it was unfair, or that you were coerced. So how do you show that when you had an opportunity in front of the judge? And the stipulation itself would say, so and so was told to review this with a lawyer, but they refused. And the stipulation will say that because the lawyer that drafted it will know to include everything that it needs in order for this stipulation to be enforceable and to have a life of its own that's difficult to set aside.
That's one of the reasons why I'd mentioned the narcissist, because in doing some research, I I was shocked at their behavior in court, agreeing to certain things and coming back into court trying to change. It's extremely important for both parties to have competent attorney that can say to you, "Hey, you can't move things around at your will. This is not a joke. This is not a personality thing? How you feel on one of them? You need to know that the regulations are this, and you can't break them as you feel like. This is not a street corner situation. There are children involved, there are
Mm-hmm.
property involved sometimes, there are many issues involved.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to get your head together and versus the other attorney so that you don't walk into a conveyor belt, so to speak. And it's again, divorce is a very complex situation.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes emotion get the best of a person who wants a divorce, and then they find out they didn't need a divorce. They can work it out with their partner sometime if you thinking straight and if there are children involved. It's very complex
Right.
sometime, and you don't know where it's going sometime. And again, it's very important to have the information that you gave was very solid, and it covered the matters that I wanted to hear about a narcissist. And you did a
Mm-hmm.
good job representing that situation. One of the things that moved me um, is that I feel that if a person who wants a divorce should not go to a person who's not a lawyer seeking advice. I think the best person to go to is a person like you who's qualified and can give them prop. If they put everything, the truth on the table to you, it's better
Right.
to go to an attorney. Don't you agree?
Right. I totally agree. And to go to an attorney that does divorces. Don't go to an attorney that does real estate and does a divorce once in a while. Go to an attorney that is specialized in divorces because they will be up to date. The law changes, their case law that attorney has to be on top of to know what is that governs each and every single case. So definitely, not only go to a divorce attorney, but another option before going to an attorney, I always say go to an attorney, not before going to an attorney, but while you're with an attorney, would be mediation. Mediation is also a very good option because it helps the two parties come together, and they will be together with a mediator who will then be able to work out together jointly, work out all the issues in the divorce. And so sometimes mediation is highly recommended. The only time that I don't recommend mediation is if there's a history of domestic violence,
It's
because
interesting that you mentioned mediation. That's my next question. But before I get into mediation, which I think is extremely important, I did a lot of research on that. I wanted to find out at what point some parents, the kids are treated as assets. In what cases that happen where they use the kids in a divorce situation?
so unfortunately you see that more often than not. uh,
Wow.
you see parents, kids are very aware of what's going on. Kids know how each of the parents feel about each other in more cases than not. Like there are a few cases that I have had where the children have been completely protected, so to speak, from from what's going on, from the animosity. In most cases, the children are aware of the animosity between the two parties, which is very sad. And and people will use the children. And I've heard cases where people are like, if and they'll it's almost like blackmailing the other party by using the children. So yeah, that happens very often. It's very sad, but it happens very often. I always tell my clients, whether they're the custodial parent or not, I always tell my clients, try to keep the children out of this. If they ask you about it, or what's going on, sometimes the older children ask more questions than the younger children. The younger children always want their parents to be together, always want them back together. But
I
I
agree.
always tell parents to protect their children from the divorce, because that has a lot of it affects the children, and it can have a detrimental effect as well.
No question about it. Especially if the kids are very young, psychologically, it can destroy them. Seeing
Hmm.
their parents going in a different direction and using them as a pole and telling them what to say in court if they're called. And in some cases, most kids end up in therapy. Their parents going separate ways and losing their home, losing the comfort that they had, being transferred to a different school. It can
Hmm.
have horrible, horrible effect in some kids because they didn't see this coming, and
Right,
sometimes it's secret to them. When they didn't see it coming, it's a big blow, no question about it.
right.
You
And
know,
so, in many cases where there's issues of custody, the court will assign a attorney for the child, or the children, and the children will have their own attorney as well.
as we talk a little bit, let's talk about mediation. Becomes more common in court system today. What can we expect when we talk about mediation?
So I know that in Queens County where I practice, when you go in for the preliminary conference, the court will recommend and or inform the parties that mediation is available to them, and right there and then the parties can agree to mediation. And I believe the first couple of hours are free, that if they wanted to stay in mediation and have the agreement drawn up by the mediator, they would have to pay. But I believe the first hour or two are free. So in all my cases, I recommend, except where there's domestic violence, I recommend the my client to agree to the mediation. And what that does is it has a person who's not representing either party, the mediator, who is completely unbiased, who's going to look at all the factors of the divorce: custody, equitable distribution, and all the items in the equitable distribution. It could be a pension, a house, it could be a joint bank account, it could be whatever it is that the parties think as well. That in an inheritance, which inheritance is not marital property, but if it's commingled, then it becomes marital property. Commingle means that if you get an inheritance, it's just yours, but once you put it in the joint account, now it becomes marital. So all those things the mediator will go through, and the mediator is skilled in knowing how to bring the two parties to a favorable decision for both of them, for fair and favorable decision. So mediation is good. Attorneys, I sometimes, we represent our clients, we're advocates. Sometimes it can become a little more litigious than it has to, although I have my colleagues, my adversaries that I've dealt with, have all been very reasonable. So we do tend to be reasonable, but we're still advocates. And so, you know, maybe we're fighting for sole legal custody, on a remember this, I'm talking about cases where there is no domestic violence. Maybe we're fighting for sole legal custody, and that's what our client wants, and that's what we're fighting for. But in the mediation situation, they may see things differently. And the mediator may say, well, what is it that you really want? Forget about sole custody, joint custody. What is it that you would like? And what is it that you would like? And then knowing what the both parents want, it might be something that actually it balances. It may be something that it is doable, and once they realize that that's doable, then you can put a name on it. Maybe it is joint custody with primary residence to one parent and parenting time to the other, or maybe it's a straightforward joint legal custody, and then the parties can work it out because they've been working it out. So that's what mediation can do.
How common is domestic violence when we talk about mediation cases?
So in mediation cases, I know that in whenever I have a case that involves domestic violence and mediation is then suggested, the court will suggest it, not recommend. The court will suggest, will say, we have mediation available. Are you interested? I will always turn it down because I don't think it's effective. When you have a victim that has experienced domestic violence by the partner, it's very difficult for that victim to feel empowered in a mediation environment. In a mediation, you both parties will feel empowered. But it's very hard for a victim to feel empowered. So in mediation, I never agree to it. In family court, they also suggest mediation to all the litigants, but not if the mediator will not accept cases where there is domestic violence for that very reason. So for domestic violence, there really isn't mediation that I know of or that I would agree to.
And we're talking about domestic violence. Is most cases the domestic violence against women, or you see most domestic violence against men?
So I've had both, but mostly women. So most of the domestic violence women, I've seen now same gender violence in family court. They changed the requirement. So in order to file in family court, you needed to be related either by marriage or by blood or have a child in common to file a petition in family court. Now they intimate relationship. And an intimate relationship can be defined as two people. It doesn't even have to be that they're sexually intimate, but that they're, close, like best friends or people that live together, roommates, can be considered in an intimate relationship. And that was changed years ago in order to include same gender, because now we have a lot coming forward where there's domestic violence in that community. And so so domestic violence, but I see that mostly in family court. In my divorces, I have some with issues of domestic violence, and again, that it's, in and I've had actually same sex divorces, with domestic violence. So in Supreme Court, one of the reasons to get a divorce, just to say it in layman's terms, so that everybody understands, is domestic violence. A person that has been subjected to.
I want to go back to. I want to go back to. I want to go back to something you mentioned about intimate relationship. Does the intimate relation always involve sex, or there are cases where sex are not involved in intimate relations?
Oh yeah, no, there are cases where sex is not involved. Sex does not need to be involved to be considered an intimate relationship. It could be a boyfriend and a girlfriend. You know, a young teenagers, maybe they're not having sex, but they're a boyfriend and girlfriend, or it could be a boyfriend and a boyfriend, or a girlfriend and a girlfriend. It could be a roommate. So it has to be somebody that you have a close relationship with, not just, it could be the neighbor next door, but that's not considered intimate because you don't really have a close relationship with that neighbor. But if it's somebody that you live with or someone that you have a relationship with, that's considered an intimate relationship.
It's fair to say that mediation is effective, that it does work.
So I believe that it does. It does work. Even the few hours that they get, the hour or the 2 hours, free hours that they get, it sort of helps the parties talk about what it is that they want, and talk about it in a in a setting, right, where they're together. Because usually with a divorce, unless you have a conference, which you can have a conference in a divorce setting, right? You see that on TV a lot, where the other side is sitting with their lawyer and you're sitting on this side with your lawyer, and it looks very confrontational, right? They're on one side, you're on one side. But that's not mediation. Mediation, usually lawyers don't go. I don't like to go to mediations because, if the other lawyer insists on going, then I go. But I don't like to go to mediations because I feel that it's a different setting, and if a lawyer goes, then now you have that adversarial element that you didn't have before, if it was just a mediator who's trying to bring people together to agree. It's trying to get people together to realize that they are actually agreeing to a lot more than they believe they are agreeing to. So that's what a mediator, an effective mediator, is someone that can help the parties arrive at that point where they're like, well, we're on the same page on a lot of things, and so to bring a lawyer into that situation, make it more adversarial instead of that mediation, vibe, for lack of a better word.
I agree. I agree. Well, Ms. Munoz, in behalf of the few, thank you so much for being our special guest. We have learned a lot about the system. We have learned a lot in this interview, at least I have, about mediation. And we don't have word to thank you for your kindness, for your presentation that was very clear and factual in every way. We thank you so much for being our special guest on the Grapevine, and hope to work with you down the road again sometime pretty soon.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Well, we've come to the end of our program. We want to take this opportunity to thank our special guest, Ms. Sandra Munoz, who is an attorney and had the opportunity to work with her today. She answered a lot of very important questions about divorce in general and mediation, and the importance of mediation and how it applies in our work. We hope that each and every one of you who have viewed the program today, and how important and how dangerous divorce can is for certain kids, and when their parents decide to divorce them. So we hope to see you next week at the same time on the International Grapevine, which every week we have something important to discuss with you. And again, thank you for watching our program, and hope to see you next week at the same time, at the same place. Good night.